most strategic locations in the entire world when it comes to conducting World War III, especially from a NATO standpoint, is the country of Romania. NATO is currently building the biggest ever base ever to be built in Europe. And the candidate for president, the oncoming candidate for president in Romania, is trying to stop that because he wants peace. Now, he won the first round with 23% of the vote, only to have Romania freeze the election due to Russian influence, which they provided zero evidence. Is Romania in the midst of a coup right now?
They don't understand what is going on here, because if they use Romania as a door for war, what would be next? We don't need war.
So this NATO base, just to be clear, the biggest NATO base ever to be built in Europe, is going to be constructed to conduct a major offensive into Russia.
Exactly, this is a word, offensive, which is wrong way. And we cannot accept this. Simple as that. Because it's not our business. It's not our war again.
But we're not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in heavenly places.
Which countries are neighbors of Romania? It borders Hungary, Ukraine, Moldova, Bulgaria, and Serbia.
Y'all ready for this? Y'all ready for this? Y'all ready for this? Y'all ready for this?
Breaking news out of Romania, you're now looking at your new president, Nicusor Dan. That's right, according to exit polls, he has won 55% to 45%. Remember, Dan is the Bucharest mayor. He was an independent. But after the runoff, we saw all the other parties essentially say, hey, we're getting behind him, which led to a massive surge in voters. Analysts had said from the beginning that if there was going to be a surge, it was going to be in his favor for obvious reasons, because the guy that was going against him, George Simeon, he's like the MAGA leader of Romania. Remember, Dan, 55 years old, he ran on anti-corruption, pro-institution platform, and then, of course, pro-EU. Simeon, on the other hand, was once again kind of MAGA, and right now is actually not even accepting the results of the polls. He took to social media to announce that, quote, I am the new president of Romania, which is not true. I will say tensions are going to be very high since Simeon has not conceded yet, which could make this into a massive political battle, but we'll see what happens when the official polls are in. That being said, Romania, I'm very happy for you. This was definitely the better choice. Congratulations, Romania. Here you can see your new president waving to all of his supporters here in the capital. How incredible to see. With 99% of the vote in, he won in a major, major victory. And right now, Romanians are like, they're going to party throughout the entire night. Because if things went the other way, this would have been a very bad situation. And speaking to a few Romanians on the ground, they are chanting one very important thing loud and clear. Rusia nu ita, Romania nu este tata. Which translates, for those who don't know, Russia, don't forget, Romania is not yours. Talk about badass, right? Don did give a speech after the official winning, and he says that Romania begins a new stage tomorrow and needs each of you, ultimately saying that the reconstruction of Romania starts on Monday, and that we need to build Romania together, regardless of whoever you voted. We need to come together, and we can do this together. Once again, Romania, congratulations. The whole world is very happy for you. Go celebrate. Have a great time. This is, as he says, victory is yours. It's 100%. Victory is yours.
Alegerile sunt despre comunități. Și în alegerile de azi a câștigat o comunitate de români care vrea o schimbare profundă a României. O comunitate care vrea funcționalizarea instituțiilor statului. O comunitate care vrea reducerea corupției. O comunitate care vrea un mediu economic prosper pentru români.
So Romania just had an election, and a far-right candidate inspired by Donald Trump won the first round in a landslide. Let's talk about why it matters. So Romania isn't just any country. It's a NATO member that borders Ukraine, Moldova, and the Black Sea. That makes it a frontline state against Russia. And it's also been one of the key allies to Ukraine. But now, George Simeon, who's a massive Trump supporter, just won the first round of the election. He destroyed every single poll, and it was the most decisive first-round victory since 1990. He didn't win an outright majority, so there's going to be a second round, but polling market is already giving him a 73% chance of winning. And here is the crazy part. Romanians abroad showed up hard for him. In the UK, 65% voted for Simeon. So who is this guy? Simeon is a massive Donald Trump fan. He wears his merch, he went to Washington for Trump's inauguration, and he himself said that his party is, quote, almost perfectly aligned ideologically with the MAGA movement. You know how Trump wants Canada to join the US? Well, Simeon wants Moldova to join Romania, and he's actually banned from entering Moldova because he's considered a national security threat. Not surprisingly, he's also very skeptical about supporting Ukraine and is currently banned from visiting Ukraine. He actually used to be quite hardline on Russia. When the war started, he called Vladimir Putin a war criminal and said that sanctions were not enough. But now, he seems to be doing whatever Trump does. He doesn't want Ukraine to receive more aid, and just a few days ago, he said that Russia actually was not a significant threat to NATO. Simeon also supports the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank. He believes that Kosovo should be part of Serbia. He's a Eurosceptic and is ready to break European laws, but he doesn't want Romania to leave the EU. He's also pro-NATO, which isn't too surprising because countries like Romania absolutely need NATO for protection. And now, the center-left Prime Minister of Romania resigned, which is just adding to the chaos and is basically ending Romania's old political order.
Something massive is happening in Europe right now, and almost no one is connecting the dots. But once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. And Romania is suddenly at the centre of it all. Think about this. The UK, after years of Brexit drama and waving goodbye to the European Union, is suddenly trying to rejoin the EU. That's not just political backpedaling, that's strategic. And it happened on the exact same day that Romania elected a new president who just happens to be extremely pro-EU. Coincidence? It's not likely. Because what did that new president do on day one? Sign 2 laws, both focusing on war readiness. And at the same time, European arms companies are booming. Stock prices through the roof. That doesn't happen unless the market, aka the people with insider knowledge, are betting on military conflict. This isn't speculation, this is positioning. Now here's where it gets darker. Poland, that was phase 1. Over the last few years, it's been transformed from a bored state into a full-blown NATO launchpad. Billions spent on tanks, jets, bases, missile systems. It's now a military factory in plain sight. Phase 2, Romania. Why Romania? Well, it borders Ukraine. It's in NATO, it already has American missile defense systems, and suddenly this country that used to be ignored on the world stage is being shoved into the spotlight. But not for anything that it's done, just where it is. You're not watching random news, you're watching a chessboard being reset. When the UK starts crawling back to EU military coordination, when Romania signs war policies before the ink on election day is dry, when Poland is locked, loaded and ready, and when war stocks explode, that's not a coincidence, that's choreography. And we're all being shown the performance after the curtains have already opened. So what's the end game? Why Romania? Why now? Who profits if a war breaks out in Eastern Europe? It's not the people, it's not the soldiers, it's the power brokers, the defence contractors, the nations craving control over borders, energy and influence. Because if Romania becomes the new front line, Europe isn't preparing for war, it's already in motion. The only question left is, are we sleepwalking into it, or is this exactly what was planned?
The stage is being set, and Romania is in the front row. Something strange is unfolding in Europe, and the signs are too aligned to be a coincidence. Now let's break this down logically. The UK, after years of proudly leaving the European Union, is now moving to re-enter it. That alone should raise questions. But this happened on the very same day that Romania elected a pro-EU president. And that new president immediately signed 2 laws reinforcing Romania's war readiness. Now pause. Ask yourself, what are the odds that on the very same day one of Europe's strongest militaries, the UK, rejoins the EU and Romania ramps up its war legislation? But it doesn't stop here. In the past few months, stock prices for European weapons and ammunition manufacturers have skyrocketed. You can check that yourself. And that only happens when the market is expecting major military activity. And while the people of Europe aren't asking for war, their governments are steadily preparing for one. Piece by piece, they are aligning the chessboard, and Romania is being moved into a central visible square. But this strategy didn't begin with Romania. You can look at Poland. Over the past few years, Poland has quietly become a military-industrial hub. Billions spent on tanks, jets, missile systems and bases. It now hosts some of NATO's most advanced assets. What used to be a buffer zone has become a launchpad. Poland was phase 1. Romania is shaping up to be phase 2. Now, why Romania? Well, it borders Ukraine. It is a NATO member. It has US missile defense systems on its territory. And lately, the international media can't stop talking about it. A country often ignored on the world stage is suddenly at the center of attention. And not because of what is done, but because of where it is. The narrative being built isn't accidental. When the UK re-enters EU military alignment, when Romania enacts war policies on day one, when Poland is already a NATO fortress, when arms stocks surge, when media coverage shifts overnight, we are not watching random events. We are watching deliberate orchestration. And if Romania becomes the battleground, then Europe is no longer preparing for one, is walking into one. Now the real question is, who benefits?
You ever wonder why Romania is suddenly so important? Well, it's not by chance, I can tell you that. Romania is now the most strategic piece of land in Eastern Europe. It borders Ukraine. It has access to the Black Sea. It shares cultural and economic proximity to Russia, but more importantly, it's become NATO's front line. You don't build the largest NATO base in Europe unless you're planning for something big. This air base is being turned into a military city, hospitals, barracks, schools, massive runways. This isn't defense, this is staging. And you know what that makes Romania? Unfortunately, it makes it the tripwire, the sacrificial pawn, the first domino in a wider war. If conflict actually does break out, Romania doesn't just participate, it bleeds first. That's the reality. And just look at what's happened politically. In the most recent presidential election held in November 24, the conservative candidate, Calin Georgescu, won the first round unexpectedly. And boom, it was annulled because they blamed Russian interference. Second election, the same conservative party is leading again in the exit polls. Momentum was his. And then, overnight, the pro-European candidate suddenly wins. Quietly, cleanly, as if scripted. And this time, France is caught meddling. Western interference, but this one is not annulled because they got the outcome that they wanted. So let's call it what it is. Two different rules, one for the East and one for the rest. And Romania, well, just a chessboard for the global elite. And I'll tell you this from experience. Back in 2000, I had an organization helping abandoned babies in Romania, working directly with local and national government. They welcomed us. They were grateful, cooperative, until the European Union got involved. An EU delegate came into our office yelling at us, furious. How dare we highlight this issue? How dare we draw attention to abandoned Romanian children? She told us to shut it down, pack up, and get out. According to her, we were interfering in her country. Let that sink in for a second. Helping abandoned babies wasn't the issue. The image of Romania was. And this was all while the country was applying for the EU membership. They didn't want the truth. They wanted compliance, they wanted silence, and they wanted the appearance of progress, not the reality. So now, over 20 years later, the playbook hasn't changed. You still have elections controlled from abroad. You still have decisions made in Brussels and Paris, not in Bucharest. You still have a frontline country being dressed up like a partner but treated like cannon fodder. So yeah, pay attention to Romania. Because when the smoke rises, this is where it starts. And if you still think this is about democracy, about alliances, about protecting values, well, wake up. This isn't strategy, it's sacrifice. Romania isn't being protected, it's being positioned. Positioned to burn first, while the suits in Brussels sip wine and talk about solidarity, while Washington runs logistics, while Berlin hesitates. And when the first shots are fired, don't say you weren't warned. Because Romania is a tripwire, the pawn, the acceptable loss. And history, well, history won't remember who followed orders. It'll remember who saw it coming and said nothing.
Were you worried about migration? Well, wait until Romania, Poland, and the Baltic states are being dragged into war against Russia, because then there will be much more migration.
Hey, if you're European, you should probably get ready for another wave of migrants. Farsi is a beautiful language. I love Persian, so I think you're going to love a few million more asylum seekers. Because if you haven't figured it out yet, this is kind of how it works. We, as in the United States, bomb Middle Eastern countries for Israel's security. We do that because Israel bought out all of our politicians. After we overthrow those governments, we rack on a few $1 trillion in debt, and you guys take the refugees. We went to war in Iraq for Israel. We racked on a few $1 trillion in debt. You guys took in the refugees. We backed the rebels in the Syrian civil war. War, Germany took in 2 million Syrians. NATO backed the overthrow of Gaddafi. Italy took in over 1 million migrants. Iraq, Syria, Libya, what's the next big one? They want to displace Palestinians from Gaza. You guys will take in at least a decent amount of those refugees. Are you guys starting to recognize the root cause of this problem? Britain shoved in a parasite into the Middle East that sucks America dry financially. That parasite had to have the entire Middle East bombed to stay alive. And then you guys have to take in those asylum seekers to ensure that parasite's security. So if you guys have any ideas of how to stop this cycle, I'm all ears. But until then, enjoy forced diversity.
Fucking damn it. Oh, fucking damn it.
Remember when I told you that Romania is in the front row? Well, now it's becoming undeniable. There is no war declared, but foreign troops are pouring into Romania every single day. More boots, more convoys, more foreign flags on Romanian land. And the people, well, the people are not clapping. They are not comforted. They are asking questions. Villagers are walking up to the soldiers and asking, "Why are you here? Who are we fighting? There is no enemy invading us. So what exactly are you preparing for?" And the silence they get in return, it's louder than any siren. Because these people can feel something is off, right? Their roads are being occupied, their skies are filled with aircraft, and their towns are reshaped into military zones. And all of this is happening without their consent. And this is not paranoia, this is reality. Romania is being turned into a forward position in a game they didn't sign up for. And the people, especially those far from the cities, you know, the ones close to the movement, they are seeing it happening. And they are starting to speak. Because if there is no war, why are there so many soldiers? And when the time comes, will Romania be a shield or a sacrifice?
As I have said repeatedly, in my opinion, the Ukrainian war is a proxy war by the U.S. against Europe, or more precisely by the owners and controllers of global financialized capital against Europe, against the EU, with a particular focus on destabilizing and deindustrializing Germany. During his visit to the United States, the German Minister of Defense announced the signing of a large number of contracts with American arms and defense companies for the purchase of weapons and equipment amounting to approximately 23 billion euros. So they have a weapons shortage. Their industrial base is crumbling by the day. Capital outflows are at record highs. Bankruptcies are at record highs. And supposedly, their proposed solution is to ramp up military production, which is why they are fanning the flames of a potential NATO war with Russia. They want to create this hype. They want to create this panic and this frenzy about war with Russia, so to justify military spending and so on. But at the end of all of that, they end up just funneling money to American weapons manufacturers. Germany is considering mandatory military service for all citizens. So in other words, Germany doesn't have the weapons. As I said in the first story, they don't have the weapons and they don't have the military personnel for war. They don't have the manufacturing capacity to make the weapons, and they don't have the recruits for the army. They don't have willing, voluntary recruits for the army. So their solution to both of those problems, buy weapons from America and conscript the German people. So send your money to America and send your young people to war. And that's being touted, that's being sold as a plan for Germany's political and social and economic security and success. Several German MPs have supported the idea of using Western anti-aircraft systems from NATO countries to destroy Russian missiles over Ukraine. So while Germany is warning of a potential NATO-Russian war, they're actively actually promoting it. They're not warning about it. In fact, they're promoting it by advocating NATO's direct involvement in the Ukrainian conflict militarily. Very plainly, this again is because Europe is on the path to becoming a conflict zone itself, as I've talked about again many, many times. And this will just provide the U.S. weapons sector a new market. They'll just pivot their destabilizing and military and conflict economy to Europe as the productive economy, and all productive economic activity pivots to the global south. The United States, and more specifically, as I said, the owners and controllers of global financialized capital, are very much interested in deindustrializing Europe, destabilizing Europe, impoverishing Europe, and subjugating Europe. The approach of America towards the global south, and the West towards the global south, but specifically America, their approach to the global south, whether it's Latin America, Africa, or Asia, their approach is now going to shift, where they're going to be treating Europe the way they used to treat the global south, and they're going to treat the global south the way they used to treat Europe, including the militarization of Europe and trying to turn Europe into a conflict zone. And we know already from, if you've been following my other content, in my opinion, one of the core characteristics and drivers of the West's violence has always been the competition for material resources. So they are going to decrease Europe's access to material resources and then watch them fight each other. EU, the UK, all of America's Western so-called allies, they need to make an urgent reassessment of their relationship with the United States. Of course, this also means that the people of those countries in the EU and so on, they need to make a serious reevaluation of their own leaders, all of whom are just going along with America's plans, and who seem to be the only leaders left in the world who still think it's a good idea to follow Washington's orders. You know, 60% of Europeans no longer feel that America is a reliable ally or partner. That puts EU leadership at odds with the population in this regard. Even the European Council on Foreign Relations said that America's interests and Europe's interests no longer align, particularly on trade and security issues. And of course, they're right. America has been pursuing a systematic campaign of destabilization across Europe for years, and particularly since the Ukraine war and the Russian sanctions. I've been talking about that since the beginning. Thanks to these policies, Europe is in a death spiral. Bankruptcies are at record highs, business closures, home foreclosures, companies relocating, factories shutting down. I mean, Germany is in a rapid state of deindustrialization. America is trying to pit Europe against Russia, pit the UK against Russia, which is depriving the whole continent of affordable energy, and it's prompting militarization, which they can't afford, all of which is for the benefit of American oil and gas companies and for the U.S. weapons sector. People are becoming radicalized. Extremism of all stripes is emerging. You know, Europeans feel that their societies are more polarized than ever. Protests are taking place more frequently and are turning violent more frequently. Repression is getting worse. It's getting more severe. Terrorist attacks are increasing, particularly from far-right groups. The International Center for Counterterrorism attributes this, at least in part, to the war in Ukraine and the influx of neo-Nazis and other extremists and the flood of small arms that were supposedly being sent to Ukraine. The whole continent is sliding into a irreversible strife, and that's blatantly by American design. The U.S. is also trying to drive a wedge between Europe and China, even though Europe desperately needs Chinese investment, Chinese capital, Chinese technology, and the Chinese market for their own exports. And again, European leaders are just going along with this in defiance of their own populations and obviously against the interests of their own people, because EU leaders are subservient to Washington neocons. America always intended for the war in Ukraine to spread. They never intended for Ukraine to win. The whole point was always to accelerate Europe's destabilization, their isolation, and their deterioration. And so far, no one is doing anything whatsoever to pump the brakes. So yes, America and its so-called Western allies, the UK, the EU, are really at a make or break point. You know, people always talk about being on the right side of history. Well, Europe needs to start making decisions on the right side of the future, because their relationship with the United States has frankly put them into an existential crisis. The fact is, BRICS is building an alternative to the old US-led world order, and Britain and the EU need to understand this. The global system of the 20th century is a relic. The balance of power no longer favors the G7, and the Global South is the only vehicle left with wheels still on it and with a working engine. And Europe needs to hitch a ride with them if they don't want Uncle Sam to drive them off a cliff, because that's where they're going now. I mean, I know it's going to be a traumatic adjustment for these Westerners, for these Europeans, accepting the fact that your so-called Western civilization and your societies are actually unsustainable, and your great American protector and benefactor is actually cannibalizing you. But on the other hand, turning to the Global South for your survival isn't really anything new. I mean, you never would have actually even been anything of significance without your imperialism and colonization of Africa and Asia. So the truth is that you've always been a dependency, and you still are. The difference is that you used to get to pretend that you weren't the dependent one, because you used to be able to just steal from the Global South in order to prop up your societies. But you've always been dependent. So there's no real change there. Just an attitude adjustment is necessary, and an acceptance of your real status vis-a-vis the Global South. You will have to humble yourselves to some degree to cooperate with BRICS. But believe me, it's better than the utter humiliation that you're going to suffer if you continue cooperating with the Americans.
If we trap him in a corner and he feels his whole existence is at threat as leader of the Russian regime, then that is a very dangerous time for us all.
I mean, just look at how absurd this is. He's saying, correctly, that if you push Russia into a corner, it's not really wise. It's dangerous. It's dangerous for Europe. It's dangerous for everybody. They have 6,000 nuclear weapons. It's a nuclear power. You don't want to put them into a corner. Well, that's what you've been doing. That's what you've been deliberately doing, knowingly doing, completely conscious of the risks. You were warned in the United States, in Europe, the UK, warned by your intelligence services that Russia sees Ukraine as a red line. Ukraine joining NATO is a red line. They see it as an existential threat to Russia. You've been knowing that for 14 years. And you've insistently been pushing them into a corner. And now you're saying, if we push them into a corner, it's dangerous. That's what you've been doing. That's what you did do. Knowingly, deliberately, calculatedly.
I think it's really important. This is a dangerous time, a dangerous time across Europe. It's really important this doesn't become a conflict between NATO and Russia. And Putin can't turn it into an issue where it looks as though we are battling against Russia.
And now you're saying, we don't want this to become a conflict between NATO and Russia. Then why did you insist on the right of Ukraine to become a member of NATO? Why? Because it would immediately be a military conflict. None of you want to send troops. You don't want to send troops. You don't want to send fighter jets. You don't want to have a no-fly zone, because that will immediately become a military conflict between European countries, between NATO and Russia. Well, if you allowed Ukraine to become a member of NATO, then it would be. You would have to do that. You would have to send troops. You would have to send fighter jets. You would have to have a no-fly zone. You would have to do all of the things that you don't want to do now if you let Ukraine into NATO. But you don't want to do those things, which means you don't want Ukraine to be in NATO. If you had just said that from the beginning, then you wouldn't have this problem, because that is precisely the thing that Russia has always opposed and has always let you know is a red line for them. And it's the exact same thing, that one precise thing, that the West, that the U.S. refused to negotiate prior to this conflict. We can talk about everything, but we will not talk about the possibility, it's completely off the table, that Ukraine will be just a neutral country and not a member of NATO. We're not going to even discuss that. We have to continue to hold out the future possibility of Ukraine joining NATO. When the reality is, none of you want to go to war with your own troops, with your own fighter jets, against Russia for the sake of Ukraine. So you don't want them to be NATO. You don't want to be obliged to go to war with your troops and your fighter jets against Russia. Correctly, you shouldn't want to, but you don't want to do it. But you would have to do it if you let them join NATO, which means you were never going to let them join NATO in the first place. So why didn't you just say that? The entire thing is fabricated for the purpose of what is happening.
What is happening now is what they wanted to have happen, because it was easily averted, could easily have been avoided. Everybody knows how to avoid it. Everyone knew how to avoid it for the last 14 years. Everyone saw it coming for 14 years, and you pursued it diligently until it happened. Meaning that what is happening now is exactly what you wanted to have happen.
What we're doing is we're supporting Ukraine in its independence and its self-determination and in its sovereignty.
I just wanted to say one thing about hypocrisy. You can talk about the hypocrisy of the West, you can talk about the hypocrisy of the United States and all of that, and it's all true, but you're not learning the lesson from that. To say, well, you didn't care about national sovereignty when you invaded Iraq, you didn't care about national sovereignty and independence when you invaded Afghanistan or any of the other places, you didn't care about it then, why do you care about it now? That's true, that's all true. That is hypocritical. But it's only hypocritical if you actually think that the rhetoric means something to them. The principles don't mean anything to them. They didn't believe in national sovereignty when they invaded Iraq. They didn't believe in it when they invaded Afghanistan. And they don't believe in it now. That has nothing to do with the West's response, the collective West's response engineered by the United States to the conflict in Ukraine. It has nothing to do with it. That's just the sales pitch. That's just a rhetorical cover for a project of destabilization that has been pursued knowingly, calculatedly, deliberately for 14 years.
Security and peace, or peace with security, and how to end the carnage on the killing fields of Ukraine, where lives are being devoured by a ruthless mechanical precision. Let us reject outright Donald Trump's predatory seizure of Ukraine's natural resources. Let us campaign to get the whole of Europe, not just one country or another, out of NATO immediately. There is no point in NATO. It has been proven. Donald Trump has proven it. We should have proven it before Donald Trump. But we need to get out of NATO. Brussels needs to throw NATO into the sea. Let us plot a course to a non-aligned but never neutral Europe. A non-aligned but never neutral Europe. Offering to relax sanctions as a carrot and return to Russia its $300 billion of frozen assets. We should immediately commence negotiations with the Kremlin and with Beijing on a comprehensive strategic arrangement between Europe, Russia, and China. An arrangement within which Ukraine becomes, in the next 100 years, what Austria was during the Cold War. What was Austria during the Cold War? It was sovereign, it was neutral, democratic, and as integrated with the rest of Europe as its citizens needed and desired. That's what the plan for Ukraine should be. On green prosperity, we must fiercely oppose military Keynesianism. It is unsustainable. The only thing it can produce is poverty, debt, and more crisis, not to mention war. We must fiercely oppose military Keynesianism, and we must replace it with a massive green investment program that combines development with degrowth. On dignity, let us campaign for a new monetary commons that sidelines private banks, offers a trust fund for everyone, and guarantees a universal dividend, call it a universal basic income, to each. On the big thorny issue of migration, let us turn the accusation of us being soft on foreigners into a virtue. Let us shout it from the rooftops that Europe without mass migration will die, it will perish, it will not be viable. Let us proclaim that we want migrants, not out of solidarity, but out of self-interest. In the last 9 years, Europe refused to democratize, and therefore today it is disintegrating. It is degenerating into a totalitarian war union. You can see that, you can smell it. This is what happens when you have austerity for the many and money printing as if there is no tomorrow for the very few. Mixed with this austerity, you have mind-numbing surges of inequality.
The Ukraine war has always been a proxy war by the United States against Europe. And in that regard, it has been a very successful war. From the perspective of the national OCGFC, the Ukraine war served at least two functions. First, the destabilization of Europe, and second, the strengthening of BRICS, which included for example, the creation and the proliferation of alternatives to SWIFT, different trading systems and so forth, the boosting of BRICS economies like India, like South Africa, like China, like the GCC and so on, as well as Russia, as a result of the Russian sanctions, as well as advancing a sort of division of the globe into spheres of influence, with the global north, the west, and so forth, Europe and the European continent falling under American influence, and the rest of the world being for BRICS, the global south being for BRICS, or to simplify it, for China. The Ukraine war has been immensely powerful and immensely useful in accelerating the transition of the global economy that I've always been talking about. So what they are there to discuss in Riyadh, in my opinion, doesn't have so much to do with Ukraine as it has to do with managing the next steps of that transition. So the US is going to want to maintain the dependence of Europe. And that means negotiating the issue of Russian energy, because the only way to keep Europe energy dependent on the United States, which it is now, is to keep Russia or Russian energy out of the European market. See, it's a bit of a tricky thing for Russia because they're a major member of BRICS, but Russia is not a global south country geographically. So that means that Russia is going to share the global north. Basically, it's going to be shared between America and Russia, with the lines of those spheres of influence basically following the Soviet era pattern. I mean, peace and harmony between Russia and Europe is in the interests of both Russia and Europe, obviously, but not so much in the interests of the US, and not so much, arguably, not so much in the interests of BRICS. If Russia is allowed to normalize completely with Europe and become their major energy supplier, then that would drive the US out of the European market, and it would decrease Russia's vested interests in the success of BRICS itself, the BRICS project. So potentially resolving the Ukraine conflict could undo a lot of the progress that has been made towards the transition of the global economy. And I don't think anybody wants that. I don't think even Russia wants that. Now also, of course, for the GCC, for Saudi Arabia, they have a vested interest in all of this as well, because the lifting of sanctions against Russian energy would impact their own market share. Not Saudi Arabia so much, but the GCC, their own market share in Europe and elsewhere. So in other words, what the Riyadh meeting was about, in my opinion, and what the upcoming meeting in Saudi Arabia between Trump and Putin will be about, essentially, isn't Ukraine, but it's negotiating the terms and setting up the dividing lines for the respective spheres of influence. Now, let me be clear here. These negotiations in Riyadh are not negotiations between enemies. These are not negotiations between people who are or who have radically conflicting views of the future. No. As I've said many times, Donald Trump is a representative of the national OCGFC. Putin and MBS are among the major leaders of the global transition of the global economy. And they are among those who will be the leaders in the new management system of international affairs. See, in the global south, as I've talked about before, business, the private sector, remains subordinate to the state for the most part. Or anyway, compared to the US and Europe, it's subordinate to the state. Compared to the US and Europe, where the state is subordinate to business. The national OCGFC are the product of the subordination of state power in the West to the private sector. That's why the national OCGFC exists. But when the national OCGFC deal with China, or they deal with Russia, or they deal with the GCC, they're dealing with players who hold power in both the private sector and in the state. And those players operate more according to nationalistic interests. They're sort of a regional nationalistic OCGFC in their own right. So unlike a Trump or a Biden or, any political leader in the West, a Putin, for example, is genuinely interested in the prosperity and the security of Russia. Xi Jinping is interested in China. MBS is interested in Saudi Arabia, and he's interested in the region, and so on. So they have a nationalistic element to them, whereas Western leaders do not care about their countries. You see what I mean? So, for instance, when Trump goes to Riyadh, he's not representing America, and he's not representing American interests. He's representing the A-National OCGFC, the A-National Owners and Controllers of Global Financialized Capital. But Putin and MBS are representing the interests of their countries and the interests of their countries' private sector elites. And this is the whole negotiation that's going on over the transition of the global economy. This is the whole negotiation. It's between the A-National OCGFC coming from the West and the regional, more nationalistic OCGFC of different parts of the global South. And they're discussing how the global economy is going to be managed, how it's going to be managed between these factions. So for Trump, or whoever else might be in the White House at any given point, their only nationalistic concern will have to do with the military-industrial complex, which does continue to be, an economic force, and a force in American politics and policy making, but much less than in the past. So as I see it, they have at least two major issues to work out in Riyadh: the future of Europe and the future of the Middle East. The future of the Middle East obviously includes what to do about Israel and what to do about Gaza, which is why Stephen Witkoff was in Riyadh. I mean, he's Trump's envoy to the Middle East. He's the one who got Netanyahu to agree to the ceasefire. He has nothing to do with Ukraine. There's no real reason why he should be there, except that they're going to discuss the Middle East. So in my opinion, they're going to be talking about this. And they will be talking about this when they meet the next time. And because all of these issues are connected in one way or another. Europe, Ukraine, Russian energy exports, and the Middle East, Gaza, Israel, Palestine, and so forth. In all of these issues, there are possible trade-offs. Possible trade-offs exist. These are all bargaining chips. So if you look at what each side wants to achieve in these negotiations, Trump, as a representative of the A-National OCGFC, he will want to keep Europe dependent on American energy exports. He will want animosity to continue between Russia and Europe, but with the United States sitting it out on the bench. He'll want the price of energy to decrease for his own domestic popularity, and he'll want access to Ukraine's minerals. He'll want Europe to become dependent also on weapons from the U.S., from U.S. manufacturers, and he'll want Europe to be cut off from China as much as possible. Further than that, he'll want guarantees that he's going to have a share. He himself and his family will have a share in the development of Gaza. He will want the global transition to proceed. He will want American containment to proceed. And he'll want the continued move towards de-dollarization. Don't believe the hype. And he'll want conflict in Europe and so on. So his bargaining chips in the negotiation are the Russian sanctions, U.S. trade policy towards China, American support for Israel, and their military posturing about Iran, among other things. For Russia, they will want control over the Ukraine. They will want restored access to the energy markets of Europe. And they want generally normalization of trade and business for all Russian companies. This is what Russia would like. Saudi Arabia will want continued access to European energy markets for the GCC. They will want to make sure that Russia's interest and commitment to BRICS will be preserved, and they'll want the establishment of a Palestinian state with Israel defanged. And of course, they'll want guarantees from the U.S. that there will be no interference by them in Bilad al-Sham and in the broader Middle East, Syria, Iraq, and so on. Like I said, the U.S., or rather the A-National OCGFC, they want Europe to remain dependent, specifically on American energy. That's going to mean trying to limit Russian influence in European markets and trying to keep the EU on a short leash. They don't want Europe to be completely, destroyed, but they do want for Europe to be weakened, and they want Europe to be subordinate. They want it to be controlled. They want it to be completely within their sphere of influence. Second, they will want, as I say, Ukraine's resources, the minerals, the agricultural land, the energy reserves, and so on. This all has to be brought under Western corporate control. This is what they want. And they want to keep China at a distance from Europe. The global economy is shifting, and Washington is trying to ensure that Europe won't gain any autonomy through building a relationship with China. So what kind of a deal should we expect? Most likely, Russia will keep the territories that they have taken, but they will allow Western economic access to Ukraine's resources. They'll go along with whatever deal is made between the U.S. and the Ukrainians with regards to that. The U.S. will drop their own support for Ukraine, but Europe most likely will continue to support Ukraine to ensure that the war just sort of drags on but never reaches a definitive conclusion and potentially can ignite conflicts elsewhere. Possibly some sanctions against Russia will be lifted, especially where it benefits multinational corporations. I think that energy prices will probably be stabilized for the right people. Oil prices will probably want to stay within a controlled range, as they always have, so that Saudi Arabia and Russia and the U.S. U.S. corporate interests all benefit, not America itself, but their corporate interests. Russia will probably retain limited access to the European market in terms of energy, but only in a way that doesn't undermine America's energy dominance. Just it's been the case like this all along, actually. Europe is going to be further weakened, and they're going to be further tied to the U.S. The U.S. will ensure that Europe remains militarily dependent upon the U.S. U.S. weapons manufacturers, increasing their purchases and so on of weapons, of American weapons. European industries are going to be completely locked into American energy supplies, preventing them from pivoting to Russia or to China. I think BRICS will continue to grow. The U.S. isn't interested in stopping BRICS expansion, but they will work behind the scenes to try to keep it somewhat financially fragmented. Saudi Arabia is going to stay aligned with BRICS, but they will also maintain their ties to Western financial systems. They're going to work on some sort of a deal about Gaza. I think that the U.S. and the Gulf are going to take control of the reconstruction with Gulf financing and with some American partners being involved. But I think that the plan for the Middle East, the plan for Gaza, the plan for Palestine, and that whole region is basically being worked out to the exclusion of the U.S. I think Saudi Arabia is going to have the major say over the political landscape in Gaza, alongside Egypt.
You're learning so many important things, and I'm so proud of you.
Ne aduce chiar acum toate detaliile. Andrei, bun găsit, te ascultăm. Da, vom reveni asupra acestui